She grew up in Temple Terrace. She went to law school at Stetson in Gulfport, and she became Florida's first female attorney general. For the past 14 months, Pamela Jo Bondi was the top law enforcement officer in the United States. That is until April the 2nd, when President Trump announced she was no longer part of his cabinet.
Pam Bondi is a trusted friend of President Trump's, will remain so. And no, nobody has any idea why the Attorney General is no longer the Attorney General and I'm the acting Attorney General, except for President Trump.
The administration contends that Bondi wasn't aggressive enough going after Trump's perceived political enemies. And now, reportedly, back in Florida, Bondi's story is far from over. She is declining to appear before Congress in the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Her attorney argues the subpoena does not apply now that she's no longer the Attorney General.
Why she wouldn't want to answer questions about this incredibly important case to so many survivors and, quite frankly, the entire American public is bizarre. If she doesn't come forward under her legal subpoena, which still stands, by the way, then we will hold Pam Bondi in contempt and we'll begin that process within the Congress.
Epstein survivors say they've waited nearly 3 decades for answers, and right here in St. Petersburg, a growing coalition is demanding that Stetson Law School strip Bondi of her honors. Joining us on the set is the fellow Stetson alumni leading this pushback against Bondi, attorney Johnny Bardeen. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Johnny, I'd like to start with you. Tell us about this alumni letter writing campaign. You started it before Bondi was fired. And how does her firing change things for you, or does it not? Do you still continue?
Thanks for having me here. Yeah, we initiated the letter following Pam Bondi's testimony on February 11th from the House Judiciary Committee, in which I found her testimony to be sort of contradictory of what I was taught to be as a lawyer. I found her testimony to be deflective and non-substantive, her demeanor to be unprofessional, and contrary to the law. You know, she was required to release these files under the Transparency Act, and did it in a dilatory fashion. And when she did, it was sloppily redacted, and I was not engendered with any optimism that the job was being done well after the.
How many alumni from Stetson have signed this at this point?
So I initiated the letter following that and mailed it on February 23rd. And we garnered over 400 signatures in 6 days. And in the 6 weeks that have passed, several more.
And what is it that you all are asking Stetson Law School to do?
Well, and I think it's a reasonable ask. We're asking the College of Law to reaffirm its ethical principles so that we can impress upon the public that this is not who we are and what we stand for and how we behave as lawyers. We're asking for a public disapproval of Pam Bondi's conduct, and then following some silence from the law school, we've renewed those requests and asked that the law school rescind some honorifics that they've extended to Pam Bondi.
Michael, you've done extensive stories on Pam Bondi on her first year, talk about her roots in Temple Terrace. What has been the reaction from the Tampa Bay community to her firing?
Well, I mean, Democrats long ago have expressed their disappointment in Pam Bondi. That was a fact when she was Attorney General for Florida. What I found surprising ever since she got the job of U.S. Attorney General is a fair amount of Republicans locally have increasingly expressed their disappointment, especially with their handling of the Epstein files. A lot of people thought she was not forthcoming enough, and her messaging was very confusing. And for a lot of Republicans in Tampa Bay, I think they gave her a little leeway, but by the time of that February 11th testimony, they had it because she just wasn't answering questions, and it was just very, very confusing to them.
And people who do support Pam Bondi say that she has been placed in a very difficult position, and they point to successes that she had when she was Florida Attorney General, suing the pharmaceutical companies, and a very strong supporter of domestic violence awareness victims, domestic violence awareness advocates, and domestic violence survivors. And so when you look at what's going on with her now, what do you think would be her biggest problem at this point, Michael?
Well, when she was Florida Attorney General, one of her main things was sex trafficking. And she made that a very big plank of her 8 years in office. She made it a very big campaign issue in both elections. And to see her give that testimony on February 11th, where she didn't even look at the victims of the Epstein situation, it was just kind of like, again, I think a lot of people looking at Bondi now are like, what happened? We knew you when you were at the state attorney's office. We just don't recognize this person. And I think that finally came home for Republicans in the last year.
Tara, what does her firing tell us about the current structure of the relationship between the White House and the Justice Department? Just putting aside all of the politics, constitutionally, legally, what does it tell us about the structure that has been in place?
Well, first off, we know that the president has the Article 2 power to set his cabinet and encourage a resignation, right? But what it does show is that there's a lockstep between the Department of Justice and the White House. It's clear that the kind of justice that the White House and President Trump wanted out of the Department of Justice wasn't being done through Pam Bondi, despite her caustic behavior at the House Judiciary Committee and the temperament that almost every lawyer and judge that ever watched her behavior in front of Congress really elicited. I mean, that's why she has contempt charges hanging over her head. But just remember, historically, she served 14 months. She's the shortest tenure of an attorney general, and we've also never seen an acting attorney general like Todd Blanche, who was the personal attorney, defense attorney for the president. So this is all very unprecedented. We don't really have a lot to go on, but we know that the Department of Justice and the White House seem to be seamless right now, and that Todd Blanche is expected to pick up where Pam Bondi didn't do the job.
Johnny, what were you going to weigh in on?
I was going to echo that. What we've seen here is a radical departure of how the Department of Justice and the White House have behaved concurrently throughout our whole history. You know, in the past, they've had parallel tracks so that there can be some sort of impartiality
and independence,
independence, and not to do the bidding of the White House. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And it's alarming to me how quickly that's been normalized.
Well, with the picture of the president on the Department of Justice, that certainly doesn't look like any other time in the history.
And you're referring to the
Picture
image of him on
yes.
the outside of the building.
Yes.